Welcome. It's a huge pleasure and honor to see many familiar but especially unknown faces. It's always a good sign. And we will have each panelist giving a quite short account that is very grounded and discussing their field of expertise and their work. And then we will have a conversation between the five of us. We will have 4 panels that approach matters of commissioning, producing, exhibiting, and collecting, in a sequence that follows the approximate coming into life of an artwork, while attending to how these topics are profoundly entangled in one another and how they will re-emerge across each panel. Each of our guests will discuss very specific case studies, as I mentioned, which are based on their own experience and their situated knowledge. These will open up to a conversation about the issues they raise, as for us to understand and imagine how to work, how to support one another, and how to make images that move us forward. There will be no introduction or reading of CVs and biographies, because each one will speak about their practice. And all of them honor us immensely and have a quite well-known activity. So I will give space and time for these presentations. And thank you to our guests more than anything, and thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you so much, Filipa, for gathering us here today. My name's Tarini Malik. I am the curator of the British Pavilion in Venice this year, working with John O'Comfort, as well as the curator of contemporary art at the Royal Academy. It's really an honor and actually quite emotional to be presenting today a little bit about the Pavilion and our work on this immensely ambitious and immensely consuming project, because we're actually entering the final week. So this is the first time in a while I've got a chance to be able to share a little bit and also a little bit about our process, which is the first time I've actually done this in terms of how we put the project together. But yes, to talk a little bit about the responsibility, the joy, the journey that was involved in producing this project. One of my first entries into art, similarly to what Filipa has mentioned, was actually through film. As a broke student on a year abroad in Paris, I had no money to do anything else other than sit in the Mediathèque at the Centro Pompidou and watch films for free and collect baguettes for a euro at the end of the day from the local boulangerie. And it was in that time, I was 19 years old, where I first encountered the works of John O'Comfort, the first of which being Signs of Empire. So to be in a moment where I can work on a project like this one, as someone who was born in India, working with an artist who was born in Ghana, representing big bad Britain, was quite an opportunity, and an amazing opportunity at that. John was nominated as an artist for the Venice Biennale 4 months before I was nominated as a curator, and he was involved in that selection process. So the opportunity to commission film in this incredibly charged, big, complicated, sticky, messy, pressurized hotbed of an environment was a very different way, I think, of curating film and curating moving image than I had ever worked on before. What we produced was essentially 83 screens in one of the biggest pavilions in Venice in a year, fundraised for it, tried to think about ways in which we would expand out of Venice itself, think about access, think about opportunity, think about also how to build on a legacy of over 4 decades of an artist who has completely redefined not only how we think about film and moving image practices, but how we think about identity, history, post-colonialism, the relationships between literature and film, literature and music, film and painting, and so on. So I felt in a way like I was kind of encountering a Goliath. but the opportunity to work with someone and really shift the context in which one produces work and one thinks about moving image within the gallery space was something that has forever changed my practice. So John is an artist who, oh God, that's a terrible image, I apologize. But John is an artist who had a presence in Venice before, not least in terms of the film festival itself, but two major encounters. The first of which was Oqui and Wessel's Biennale, All the World's Futures, which I was really grateful to be able to work on as well, and then the inaugural Ghanaian Pavilion. So we entered this space of immense power and privilege that is the British Pavilion, which sits on top of the Giardini, looking over at all of its colonial counterparts, with both kind of trepidation and ambition, but also thinking on how we build on a legacy of kind of works that have happened before, and how we can create something which is in dialogue, it's generative, it's active, and how it also has a space beyond the walls of the pavilion itself. So our first conversation was sitting outside Navodi on the Via Garibaldi in May, which some of you might be very familiar with as a kind of Biennale adage. And there were three ways in which we talked about what we wanted from this. And the first was the monumental, thinking about an aspect of John's practice which has been integral to the way that he's worked for the last 40 years, which is thinking about moving image, of film, of art, of discourse as monument and anti-monument, and the ways in which art can offer new perspectives in how we commune together, and ways in which it can shed light on our shared humanity. The second of which was the elemental. John often talks about starting, and Hoor will know this very well, starting each of his projects with an element, an investigation into the element. And I mentioned the two previous works in Venice, the Ghanaian Pavilion and Vertigo Sea, because of the connections between those works. And with this work, we talked a lot about water. And water felt not only a kind of apt a starting point for an investigation, thinking about Venice, thinking about the threats that are embedded when you walk around in Venice in terms of climate change and the climate crisis, but also in terms of ideas of nationhood, identity, belonging, home, diaspora, migration, all of these aspects which very much encapsulate John's practice, but also very much encapsulated who we both were in that moment of trying to produce this exhibition. And the last of which is the heard and the unheard. So thinking about the sonic, ways in which we listen to one another, ways in which we don't listen to one another, how that shapes society, how that shapes our ideals, but also what it means to present work in a biennale. What does it mean to present film within the context of so much else that's going on? What is relevant about this format? How does it shift the ways in which we communicate with one another? And how does it shift our kind of linguistic structures? But also, again, about this idea of access and the sonic, and ways in which we can look at this incredible privilege in showing in Venice and expand it beyond the show itself. So, this is the first image that we ever came up with together, which was in the second week of working with one another, and this is the first time we've shared it, which is a really kind of AI gloss-like, kind of strange rendering of the front of the British Pavilion, which is this neoclassical 19th century Georgian architecture. The kind of colonial languages scream out at you. And it's literally, I don't know if anyone knows this, but it's the highest point in Venice. Actually, it literally sits above and looks out like a kind of colonial force at everything around it. And it became very clear to us that what we wanted to do was to create a monument to our identities, a monument to the places that we're from, a monument to a post-colonial British person, to the diaspora, and to really look at this idea of power and agency. And so to create an intervention on the front of the building which signaled and gives space to different forms of identity. Images from archives all around the world, images of liberation movements, of the climate crisis in Canada, of wildfires in the States, of floods in Bangladesh, of different voices which have been directly impacted by British colonial force and continues to do so today. We talked a lot about different exhibitions, and this is kind of really interesting when you think about film. For some reason, we do this very kind of separationist thing when you think about moving image in galleries, which is not to kind of consider it within the lexicon of art history more widely. And some of the kind of earliest conversations that we were talking about were Carrie Mae Weems' show at the Barbican, where she looked at, again, this sort of complex arrangement of screens and objects, looking at ideas of staging and theatricality, but also Chris Ofili, who uses this idea of panels or paintings as screens or partitions or walls in which to create structure and narrative. A kind of really strong inspiration for us as well was looking also at the paintings of Rothko. And when John first mentioned it, I thought, oh no, this is not the direction that I personally want to go in. But actually, the kind of what he opened up to me was so extraordinary in thinking about ideas of abstraction and how they lend themselves to thinking about drama, to manifestations of identity, to looking more complexly at history, of gradient, of tone, of nuance. And so we very literally researched hundreds of images of Rothko in order to produce literal palettes in each room in which we could kind of create a narratival structure, 3 minutes, sorry, between each of the spaces, which are complex spaces for moving image. So how do you then translate an artist who works in an incredibly monumental way with large multi-screen installations into spaces which can feel more domestic? And so for the first time, we did exactly that. We looked incredibly closely at Renaissance churches, at this idea of kind of paneling of screens, of how images juxtapose with one another, at Rothko's chapel, at the idea of an institution as a monument, as a church, and tried to think structurally about how we would create an experience which could then have a legacy outside of Venice. And so we were inspired by the work of, and not the man himself, because he's a complex one, Ezra Pound, and looking at his journey through histories in the cantos. And so each of the rooms in the exhibition is structured like a single constellation of works, which makes up an entire overlocking and interlocking single immersive journey, which can essentially have many different lives beyond the work and beyond the exhibition itself. So each of the rooms was very, very directly influenced by these Rothko paintings and by these color fields. So these are really early renderings, which no one has ever seen before outside of our initial team, where we started to think again about conversation. So a kind of important thing to talk about in terms of commissioning is this worked in a really extraordinarily different and difficult way, where you essentially had to establish the bones of a structure in which the film then responded to. So the actual editing and the actual filming process. So we created essentially models of different altarpieces or sculptural altarpieces within each of the rooms, which then the films went into right at the opening. So each of the rooms was also a way to think very, very differently around perspective. This is the first time that John has worked specifically in a monitor constellation in his entire 40-year career. And this is the first time he's ever thought of essentially doing things very differently in terms of perspective. So we have screens here on the floor, kind of resonating with the idea of a fount, and these different panels looking like Renaissance altarpieces. Again, each of the kind of tonal variants of each room takes you on a different journey, which echoes kind of periods of abstract expressionist art. This is also the first time we took over the basement of the British Pavilion, and this might sound like a kind of side note or something that's not very interesting, but for us this was a monumental achievement. The first thing that John said to me, quite literally when we sat down for our first meeting, he said, "We need to take up space. You and I, we need to take up space." And that's what it was literally about. So we took over a part of the building which had only ever been used once in its 130-year history for art, which was when Mike Nelson took it over. And we broke a ceiling, created a staircase, and created a series of 12 vertical panel screens in order to try and create this sensibility of of entering into a different dimension. So it's time for me to stop, and I've gone well over, but I wanted just to show you a few different images, as well as some of the kind of inspirations, which was to think about listening and water, this idea again of the elemental, this idea of the sonic, which kind of permeates every frame and every kind of tone of the artwork. And so, you know, I understand how lucky we all are as an industry, how many of us are to experience the work in Venice. And what I hope is that Listening All Night to the Rain is simply the starting point for a journey for multiple offshoots and constellations of this work to exist in different formats. So I do hope you get to experience it in that way. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Filipa. Thank you, Emilio, Gabriella, everybody. I know it's been an intense program for all of you, and it's the first time I'm in Loop, so I'm very happy to be here amongst many familiar faces, some who I haven't seen in a very long time, so it's really great. But before I speak, I really want to talk about how privileged we are to be here today, and not to forget, it's not business as usual. Our friends are being massacred in Palestine, the genocide that's taking place in Palestine, Sudan, and the Congo, and the ongoing bombardment in Lebanon. It's important in these kind of times and situations to really use our platform, as we have the privilege to hold the mic. They don't. So, as I said, it's not business as usual, but together we could support each other. So thanks. Thank you. I, of course, have too many projects to mention, so if I forgot anyone, I'm so sorry. I wanted to start with the first work we ever commissioned. I'm not going to go into my history of Sharjah Biennial, but I started working in Sharjah Biennial in 2002 for the 6th edition, 2003, and that's when we commissioned our first artwork, first film. It was the first artwork, but first film as well for the Biennial. So this is the film by Rashid Ma'sharawi from Gaza that we commissioned for 2003. It's called Shahrazad. And it talks about the situation in Palestine of this constant waiting for something to happen, not knowing what is going to happen next. It's very interesting now because Rashid has continued to do a project with filmmakers in Gaza. And looking back at our first project together, it was important that I start this presentation with this image of Shahrazad. I'm going to jump because it's 10 minutes. Another project I wanted to talk about, some of you may know, is Camp, the collective from India, from Mumbai. So Camp were part of Sharjah Biennial 9 with a project called Wharfage. They worked along the docks where Sharjah Art Foundation is. Right now the ships are across the water, but they used to be right outside our office. And what was interesting is we had this connection with a lot. Can you hear me? Yeah. We had a lot of connection with the sailors from Gujarat and India and from Pakistan and Iran. So they would come and dock on the ship. So they worked with the sailors and created a radio called Radio Mina. And then they collaborated with the sailors to film themselves on the journeys that they take on these mobile phone cameras before we all had these Apple phones. So 2011, because the work premiered at Documenta and then was shown in Sharjah, the 11th Biennial. So the film is called From Gulf to Gulf to Gulf. It's still one of our favorite films and their favorite films. It's showing right now there in Philadelphia. But what we did for Sharjah is that we showed it exactly on the water. So it's a bad photo, with this seating. And a lot of the sailors and their family would come and watch this film every day. They asked me for the DVD as well. They would come and watch this film, and it's at the end of the market. And what's really nice is a lot of the shopkeepers would come, and I remember one person, he didn't know who I was, but he saw me there every day. And he said, it's the same film every night. And I
I said, well, we have the cinema further along if you want to see something. And he goes, no, my shop is here. I can't go too far. So we had those different things, people that would come to see people they knew all the time or to see themselves on the screen, but also people who were like I want to see something else. I've watched this every day. So it's really important to think of these things, like how these works are shown. Of course, they were shown very differently in Documenta and in Context and Castles. And there it means something because the people who are part of the film are actually there. I messed up the order a little bit, but it's okay. I'm going to jump to 23, Sharjah Biennial. So I included this, hang on one second. I have to remember not to forget anybody's co-commission. No, this is a seat at the table. So for Sharjah Biennial 15, which I curated, I invited Destiny Deacon to do a new project. So for those of you who don't know, Destiny Deacon passed away recently. So this was the final film that she made. She was very surprised that I invited her for a new commission. She said we never really get these opportunities for a new film. And she really wanted to talk about how Aboriginal communities were very misunderstood. And she said, if you would just sit across a table, if people just sit across the table from us, they can try to understand us. But the idea is that people would sit and not understand. So we spoke about this table, and she wanted the table to come out into the space. And I remember we had this conversation about IKEA. She's like, oh, you guys have IKEA there? I said, yeah, we have IKEA. We can get the same table that you're filming with from IKEA. And it was in this little house that had a lot of her other works. Those of you who know Sharjah know the old heritage houses that we have. And one of them was called Beit. I forgot the guy's name. Beit something. And we started calling it Beit Destiny, like Destiny's house. And she decided to call it Beit Black. So she coined the term black, as in B-L-A-K, to talk about Aboriginal black culture. So for the exhibition, the whole installation, the house and everything in it was called Beit Black. Since Destiny's passing, everybody calls it Beit Destiny house. So I thought it was really important. It's a Super 8 film, really beautifully shot. I hope there's an opportunity for anybody to show it in any exhibitions. I'm happy to share the details. Another work by a good friend of ours, Bushra Khalili, commissioned for Sharjah Biennial 15 as well. Bushra's film was co-commissioned with Makba and opened here straight after the opening of the Biennial in Sharjah. So it was like a sister opening, and also supported by, co-commissioned by Luma Foundation. This work, The Circle, talks about the exhibition is thinking historically in the present, so talking about historical moments to a younger generation. And this discussion was talking about the theater group Al-Halaqa and Al-Asifa in Paris in 1973, and the workers' movement that happened out of this theater group. This show is now, the show that was at Makba is now back in Sharjah with a new edition, The Storyteller, and it's on view. I urge you to see this film wherever it may be showing at that time. Another artist, filmmaker, which you'll hear more of, I think, on this panel, is Mansha Diawara. I've shown Mansha's works in other exhibitions. His films I showed in Tunis, for example. It was very important to look at Mansha's works through interviews and stories. So he's done the work on Wole Soyinka, talking about Senghor. He did the interview with Edouard Glissant. And he told me that Angela Davis really loved the work that he did on Glissant and wanted that kind of film about her. So this was commissioned for Sharjah Biennial 15 and shown in other places later. It was... Let's see, it was also co-commissioned by TBA 21 with the support of the Centro Cultural Belém Foundation in Lisbon. So I don't want to forget any co-commissioners because it's important. Another older work I was thinking about is Naim Mohaiman's work, Two Meetings and a Funeral. I think about this because Vijay Prashad features in this film, and he was just with us in Sharjah, so we had a lot to say about this film. This was commissioned by Sharjah Art Foundation, and the Documenta 14. So again, for us, it's not always about us showing the film first, but actually co-production, because all of us are trying to support the same artist, so it's important that we come together and make the best work possible. Yes, okay. Another artist that we commissioned for Sharjah Biennale 15 is Coco Fusco, Eternal Night, looking at Cuba, of course, and about 3 young Cubans in prison. And I can't see, sorry, I need to get my eyes checked. So that film is showing right now somewhere else. It's been in the US, I think. Another co-commission for Sharjah Biennale was Amar Kanwar, which was later also supported by M+ in Hong Kong, The Peacock's Graveyard. This was a very different film for Amar. It was a very contemplative film. He was very... So I started planning Sharjah Biennale 15 with Okwi Enwezor, who I invited as curator for that edition. Okwi passed away 2019, and then we had COVID and endless situations. Destiny's long-term partner passed away as well, so we decided to postpone. And Amar was feeling very down throughout the whole time. So this is a very sentimental film, talking about what you take with you when you go. A lot of the people that we worked with were very close to Okwi, so it was a very moving film. And he told me that he keeps getting letters from visitors at M+ who've seen the film and very moved by it. Yeah. Going back to John Akamfra, so there's a lot to say about John, but the first film we commissioned or co-commissioned was Vertigo Sea for Venice Biennale, because of Okwi. Actually, Okwi also reached out to me for the Ghana Pavilion for Nocturnes. So the idea is that sometimes you want to support artists, you want to co-commission the same films, but you don't have, it doesn't necessarily have to fit into your program right then, and it doesn't matter who premieres the work. These films are circulated, are shown again, and it's always a pleasure to be part of it. And saying this, I put this at the last slide because I know that a lot of people here were close to Okwi, and I want to also remember Okwi through his support of artists, especially like Amar and John and Bushra and others. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Filipa and Emilio, for this opportunity. I think it's very valuable what you're doing here, and over recent times I've been even discussing with friends, and for example Leonardo is sitting here, that maybe we spoke about putting a module together for students about commissioning, because we work in a very operative way, and I think we lack critical space to somehow conceptualize the principles that guide what we do when we invite artists to work and when we commission films. I would like to give you some context on my practice. See if this works. So, nearly 8 years ago, I started working as head of contemporary art and film for the city of Porto, and 4 years ago, I began working as artistic and founding director of Batalha Film Center, Batalha Centro de Cinema, also in Porto, which is a cultural center for cinema and moving image dissemination, research, discourse, and also appreciation, of course. Over the course of the past years, I did commission a good number of films. But putting these experiences into perspective, I do not see myself as a film commissioner, and to be absolutely honest, even the idea of professionally... sorry. What's wrong? Okay, apologies. So I do not consider myself as a film commissioner, and even the idea of professionally commissioning film is something that somehow I find it a bit contentious. On contrary, curating is something we do every day, and sometimes I have to sit at the desk and think of interesting and challenging and programs for audiences. So what I'm bringing to you today, this idea of commissioning as accident, and I'm bringing you 4 cases. Something's wrong with mine. Okay, sorry. I'm bringing you 4 cases which can illustrate this very idea. Okay, you have to discount on my time, Marta. So what I mean by this and what this idea embodies is that commissioning for me is something that happens somehow in the way and most often intersecting broader projects unexpectedly as well. And the film or the film commissioning emerges for me in a sort of crossroad of events, sometimes of mismatches and so also of conflicts of some kind. I would like to exemplify this with two cases which I think encapsulate the circumstances of this accidental commissioning. Well, the first I thought it would be lovely to bring up because it's something that involves myself, Filipa, and actually John Comfort. And well, together we curated an edition of a forum I used to lead and commission annually for many years. And in that 2019 edition, we had invited Fred Moulton to be our guest speaker. And in the very last minute, Fred cancelled because he had a severe illness case in his family. So Philip and I came up with this idea because, well, I hate Zoom and Zoom meetings and Zoom conferences. And actually the forum is about community and how people could be put together to talk and discuss ideas in Porto, specifically in that context. So Philip and I came up with this idea of a long-distance dialogue through film. So we commissioned an artist who was based in New York, Mariana Silva, she was also working at Deflux at the time, to film Moulton, dedicating his own poetry to our guests, which we would then screen as a kind of an open letter to audience in front of everyone who was attending each one of the talks. And I'd like to open this and show you how the film came together, if it works. Marta, I think I need you again. Oh yeah. So I'm very illiterate.
So, whenever I'm ready. Okay. She one of them impossible domestics, shirt-waisted, walking out together dark mornings in the evening, come home pan-toting. Her hand blew up inside, blew up the house inside where she worked to blow it up and somehow love them while she be cleaning up and scheming. Sowing seeds from reading, laying out with reeds, her hand blew up inside. In her air, she have a migrant curve, her hand blew up inside. She harassed the sheet she fold by singing hellhounds in the crease. This was her air and hand.
Sorry to cut Fred's words, they're beautiful, his voice is so mesmerizing. So, to continuing, also
So,
another example.
Whenever I'm ready.
Marta, sorry, I'm so illiterate, thank you. So no, don't, I have to stop, no, please, yeah. So another example I'd like to give you of a recent case already at Batalha. I like very much to go and walk at the beach on Sunday, especially when it's sunny, and to go to the seaside, the Atlantic air. And I was on the way of commissioning the first and programming the first exhibitions, because we also do installation and exhibitions at Batalha. And amongst different artists, we really wanted to include a Portuguese person who would be a new name, someone fresh, someone probably unknown to a larger audience. And we were considering options, and one day I was at the beach and I met Mariana Villanova, a young artist from Porto, and she was grabbing seaweeds, algae, and I bumped into her and I asked her what she was doing at the beach, like grabbing this sargassum, it's very rich in different properties and iodine, and it's used for pharmaceutical purposes and also medicine purposes. And she explained that she was doing a research on the algae and she wanted to develop an artistic project with it and maybe film. And so we discussed, and one thing led to the other, and she made her first film for Batalha that came out of this sunny encounter. God. All right. This was shot in the north of Portugal, where these practices are very, very ancient. Well, the reality is that there were a few times when I, in a more premeditated and programmatically way, invited artists to develop films, for instance, through residency experiences. And what really happened in those moments is that I felt very impelled to provoke the accidentals. So I make sure when those moments happen in a more programmatic way, that artists have all the tools to work, but they are somehow led to places of discomfort. I mean, I put them in hotels and pay them fees and, of course, and feed them well and everything. But what I mean is I give them a frame, but to put them a frame which leads them to some kind of a crossroad of possibilities as well, and in a context I would also call of accidents. And I bring you two examples that can illustrate these examples. The first example is by Brazilian artist Jonatas de Andrade. I had seen Leonardo's commission in Venice, Olho da Rua. Jonatas is someone I know, whose work I know well. Was very had great impact on me, because what Jonatas did for Venice and for Nebula was he put together this experience of theater of the oppressed. Teatro do Oprimido is a theatrical practice coined by someone called Boal, and through which people from the margins are put together to enact and express themselves and their subalternities. And Jonatas did that in his hometown, in Recife, and a very pungent work from my point of view. And so what I asked Jonatas to do was to come to Porto, do a residency, and do his first work outside Brazil ever. And also asked him to work with a production team from Porto, with a Portuguese cinematographer, and I asked him to be around Batalha, discover associations and the social fabrics around Batalha, and meet specific associations. So I completely put him outside his comfort zone. It was the first time Jonatas actually did a work outside Brazil, and I think this was a real step forward in his practice. In one day he came to me and said, "Oh, I want to do a film about pigeons." And I was a bit shocked, but it turned out to be quite spectacular. So I'm going to show you an extract. this is the most abstract work that probably Jonathan has done. If you know his work, it resembles The Fish, his first work. Yeah, and it just worked with men who do pigeon racing. And just to finalize, please, just one final, allow me because of the technical problems. Just to mention this last work by João Salavisa within the same frame of a work I programmatically commission, and also it's nice to bring it up because João works not within artist film or artist moving image. Is a filmmaker who won Cannes in Berlin, the Palme d'Or, very young. And I also asked João to move to Porto to stay for a while. And what I asked him was to do a film on social housing and loss, and through a practice that could somehow work and operate the concepts of visibility. So what João did, so I gave him a frame again. I told him a few social housing areas which are really rough and dangerous in the city. I wanted him to visit and consider. And at the end, João met Helena, who had just came out of prison. She was the biggest dealer of the most dangerous social housing and area in Porto. She had come out of prison. He met Helena, and he came to me and said, look, I met Helena. She's a huge criminal. She left prison, I don't know how many years because of drug dealing, but she's really spectacular, and she's so humane. There's something, I want to dig it. And I just said, so just go ahead. So I don't know why and how, but he managed a way to really infiltrate himself within these massive tower blocks where the highest drug circulation is done in the city. And Rusa was done. Rusa is Helena's nickname. And the film did well. It entered the competition, the Biennale, the film festival in Berlin. And I also traveled with Helena with a special permission from the imprisonment the institution. And I took her to Berlin. It was one of the most moving moments in my career, I think. This is a view from the inside of that massive tower of like 30 floors or something, which is being knocked down. And it's a big debate in the city because it exists in a very wealthy area of the city, the most kind of rich city in terms of real estate value.
Não fazes ideia daquilo que eu passei lá dentro. A ver as torres a irem abaixo. A ver tudo pela televisão. Depois eu fui para dentro, as minhas colegas, a verem-me a chorar por causa da torre ir abaixo. Elas a dizerem, Helena, não chores, Xalá. Mas olha, mas foi tão triste. Foi assim, um acumulado de tristeza e de angústia só por estar a ver a torre ir abaixo.
Well, thank you very much for listening. Obrigado, Marta, desculpa.
Thank you, Filipa, for this great invitation. Thank you to Loop, to Emilio, to Marta, to everyone here. It's a great pleasure to be here and to participate in this panel with the amazing colleagues that are here. You will forgive my reading or have notes. The academic in me comes out sometimes when I'm asked to give a short presentation, but I'm also very excited to be in a place where people love film. I don't have to do any of the usual convincing that I have to do elsewhere. So I really want to say a few things. So I'm Kostas Stasinopoulos. I'm the curator of live programs at Serpentine. Established in 1970, Serpentine is a UK registered charity championing new ideas and contemporary art for public benefit. Serpentine hosts a free program of exhibitions, architecture, education, and live events. Our program takes place across our galleries, across London, and online. Collaborating with practitioners from the fields of film, art, literature, science, architecture, and academia, the Serpentine's live programs produce performances, talks, symposia, screenings, and other live events for a live and wide audience. Serpentine's objectives include commissioning and presenting the most prescient and exciting artists in the world today, and central to this is a commitment to raising the profile of exceptional practitioners at pivotal stages in their careers and supporting emerging voices with significant and ongoing collaborations. Within live programs, I have the privilege to look after Serpentine Cinema, a series of screenings, talks, and performances held in a cinema context aimed at bridging the gap between artists' moving image and experimental filmmaking. The program offers artists a unique opportunity to present and discuss their own moving image work and those of their peers in all its intersections within Serpentine's program. Moreover, Serpentine's live programs are nomadic by nature, as our spaces in Hyde Park are primarily dedicated to exhibition making. So working with cinemas across London, Serpentine Cinema contributes towards diversifying our audience, extending the reach of our programs, forming long-lasting relationships with partners and venues, as well as connecting with local communities. Recent events have included a series of screenings and conversations, often mediated by our artistic director, Hans-Rik Obrist, and other members of the curatorial team, showcasing the work of artists such as Sundra Perry, Colleen Smith, Jonas Mekas, Adelita Husseini Bey, Lucy Raven, Agnes Varda, Wayne McGregor, and Kerith Evans, to name a few. Or specially commissioned performances that include film, such as Lily Renaud Dewar's Four Walls Speaking of Revolt, Media and Beauty in 2012, where the performance took as its starting point a series of sculptures by the artist. Or Final Days, Heather Phillipson's video and sculpture installation for Castle House, a defunct department store in Sheffield in the city centre. Final Days posited real-life shopping as a now inoperative disembodied landscape. This was a collaboration between Serpentine Cinema and Sheffield Dockfest. UK or world premieres of established and emerging artists' new moving image works, such as Chatavia Gari, Alejandro Jodorowsky, Paul B. Persiado, Busra Khalili, Sarah Morris, Felix Melia, Rachel Rose, P. Staff. The list is really rich and varied. And I also wanted to share this is one of my favorite moments of Serpentine Cinema, and it's right before the screening and conversation, where we were walking down the high street in Peckham with the always curious and playful Jonas Mekas, who bought this mask from a corner shop and just suddenly pulled it out during the conversation with Hans-Rik to make a point about how art, life, and film always clash. But our dream was always and will always be to commission artist film, to support this work from the ground up, from conception to screen to dissemination, to sequels, to prequels, trilogies, to sustained and sustainable film universes and ecologies. In 2025, the Serpentine embarked on a new series of film commissions with a view to playing an active part in the production of original film and video work by emerging practitioners. This addition to Serpentine's programming strand resulted in the film After Picasso God by the London-based artist Sophie Candle, a co-commission with South London Gallery, which went on to premiere in Peckhamplex Cinema in February 2016. Further new commissions included the film Shorter Plates by artist Felix Melia, premiering at Hackney Picture House also in 2016, which examines the conditions of desire and autonomy, cohesion and coherence inside contemporary relationships. Fast forward a few years later, a few rounds of public funding cuts, a Brexit, a global pandemic, will find ourselves in a new series of film commissions by the Serpentine. And it was in the height of COVID, global lockdowns, that the art world found itself not only not slowing down, but turning into a frenzied online production that ironically and thankfully led to the emergence of newly commissioned film works. So it was in 2021 when we were discussing what the fourth iteration of the Shape of a Shell in the Mind of a Fish festival. It's a series led by Filipa Ramos and Lucia, that we decided to not go online just for the sake of going online and by necessity and turn the festival into a live Zoom experience, as was the case those days, but to pre-record the whole festival and release it over the course of the next 2 days. This gave us the opportunity to think more creatively and practically about our budget and agency, and we were able to invite 2 artists to create newly commissioned films from the comfort of their homes or their surroundings at a time of a social isolation. Made during the COVID-19 pandemic, the is subtle, various and sweet has been a way for Adham Faramawi to think about the artist's relationship with their father who passed away that summer. The film explores their relationship with ideas of land, plant taxonomy, ideas of roots and heritage in both Faramawi's home in Newham, East London, and his father's in Tuk, a town north of Cairo in Egypt. Asad Raza's Je is an endless and evolving video narrative that blends fiction and documentary as it moves around the planet. The film serves as a dynamic container for Raza's thinking, research, and writing around ecology. And named after the original name of the goddess of Gaia, Je juxtaposes multiple thematic sections which change with each release of the video. So these 2 commissions have a special place in our hearts because they emerge from these very particular circumstances, and they continue to be screened around the world, and it even led to a second German award nomination for Adham Faramawi, who then went on to create a trilogy with 2 further works. What also happened in 2020 was the Serpentine's 50th anniversary. At the time, we were thinking what to do, and as we usually do, we tend to look forward rather than back. So we catapulted ourselves to 2070, and images of doom, of apocalypse, and a world on its knees emerged. Then the pandemic happened, and a lot of lessons were learned very fast in a short amount of time, and Back to Earth emerged as our long-term anniversary project. Back to Earth ran from 2020 to 2024 as Serpentine's long-term interdisciplinary program addressing the ongoing climate emergency. This multi-year project invited over 60 leading artists, architects, poets, filmmakers, scientists, thinkers, and designers to respond to the environmental crisis. With the support of partner organizations and networks, these collaborators devised artistic campaigns, protocols, and initiatives that act as catalysts for change. Within Back to Earth, we managed to carve out 2 further film commissions. Carbying Film Collective's The Family is a film that questions the current ecological crisis, indigenous destruction, and cultural erasure that colonialism has produced in Northern Australia. Alternating between contemporary time, in which Carbying members struggle to maintain their physical, ethical, and ceremonial connections to their remote ancestral lands, and a future populated by ancestral beings living in the aftermath of toxic capitalism and white zombies, The Family mixes comedy, tragedy, and realism to reflect on the practices of the present and their impact on worlds to come. This was a co-commission between Serpentine and Evert Luckenwalde. One of the most ambitious film commissions to date is a project that I was lucky to see through from conception to end result, and this is Mantia Diawara's A Letter from Yen, a co-commission between Serpentine, PCAI, and Movie. A Letter from Yen emerges from conversations with a community in the seaside town of Yen in Senegal, where Diawara lives for part of the year. The area was traditionally and primarily occupied by fishermen and farmers, but has in recent decades been besieged by coastal erosion and uncontrolled urbanization. It is also the result of our many conversations with Mantia about this through our screens during the pandemic, trying to figure out how to make this film. Slowly and steadily, we found our co-commissioners in PCAI and Movie, and the film began production. The award's documentary unfolds as if it were a letter written to the viewer. In A Letter from Yen, the filmmaker is not only the storyteller, but also the owner of one of the houses along the beach. Following encounters between fishermen, pebble collectors, and himself, Diawara explores how their intersecting lives, collectively and unknowingly, contribute to the undermining of their shared environment. It was a film that premiered in the UK and Greece, as well as online on Movie and in film festivals, a work that led to a series of new works by Diawara that emerged from the same research and line of thought. A work and a filmmaker that we continue to celebrate and support in any way that we can, even if the project is finished. What I want to highlight here before I finish with this brief overview and commissioning examples is that we are still chasing our dream to continue to be an institution that supports those who work with film in all the ways that they require. We know that this is a long-term process with multiple variables, and we are signing up for it every time. Commissioning or co-commissioning film should not just be the signing of a check, as important as it may be to highlight the incredible need for funding these days. It is a way of relating to artistic production that is different from other areas of our output. It is necessarily about collaboration. Being a commissioner is also being open to learn from each artist, each project, each partner in a process that can challenge the modus operandi we are each accustomed to. And if we're open to it and are honest about our current and future predicaments, we might also be led to a broader systems change that will benefit us all as a sector. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarini, Hoor, Guilherme, and Kostas, for these wonderful accounts. I'm going to start with a question for whoever wants to start first, and it's something that you all approached from a very practical point of view that concerns the criteria for commissioning, for approaching an artist. And they can be either trust, as we saw in the case of John Aconfra, both with Hoor and Tarini, or they can be a matter of necessity, as when we commissioned Mariana Silva to work with Fred Moten and make her work, or often they are program adequate. When you commissioned Adam Faramawi to make a work that introduced very important topics of queer ecologies in the program. So I would like to ask the four of you, what are the fundamental, if we were to write a grammar or an instruction book for commissioning works, what are the criteria that guide you and shape your decision to work with someone? Yes.
Well, for me, I have to say there's no set criteria, because it always depends if it's on a project or if it's just the artist project is something that we want to be part of. For example, Camps was an application to a production grant, and it just made so much sense because of the connection that we have. I'm currently commissioning quite a few films for Sydney Biennale, so if anyone wants to partner, I'm happy to receive. But some artists that I've never worked with before, but I know that I've seen their previous work, I've spoken to other people that they're connected with, and I really have faith in the project that they want to deliver. So in a way, it is risk-taking with commission, but I think that's what we do in our work. And I think so far, I don't think we've been let down. So we need to keep doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to add to Hoor and what you said about each kind of relationship bringing in a kind of set of dynamics. It's like a dance, it's a constant toing and froing, and you start off with a set of objectives, and those objectives should mutate and shift as you develop a conversation together as curator or commissioner and artist. But I think, especially coming from the context of being a curator working specifically within institutions, I think it's also starting with audience and starting with context, and trying to build an understanding of who you're doing it for, why you're doing it then, and also then throwing that out of the window and not underestimating your audience and trying to build something bigger than that too. Yeah.
Well, for me, as I said, I'm interested in this space of accident, which is a space of risk, a space of indefinition somehow. And of course that I'm interested in projects that can interpret the context, a certain context, and challenge them and champion a certain revision of contextual circumstances. That's what I'm looking for. And I'm always interested in projects that somehow can trigger something new in the arts, in the practice of the artists I'm working with. Definitely.
I think people whose work traverses disciplines, environments, and also show us different ways of coming together and working is something that I'm interested in, and it is definitely a criterion, if we want to call it that. The experience of watching, by necessity, as I said, because we don't have an auditorium or a cinema in our premises, even though I would love one, to travel across the city and have artists experience their work being presented in such a grand scale in a very different context to a white cube or a gallery environment, and also watching audiences and our responsibility as a public arts institution to audiences come to those programs and really come to those programs and not necessarily knowing our visual arts expertise in Hyde Park and exhibition making is really incredible for us. So that's something that I'm interested in.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very interesting, Tarini, what you mentioned when you were unveiling a little bit of the process of working with John Aconfora for the British Pavilion. And I found particularly interesting how the proposal of have Mark Rothko as a reference for you was a, oh no. And this led me to wonder about the relationship between trust and accompanying a work. And where do we stand when we commission something in making sure it goes into a field that we think makes sense for the audiences we commission it to, for the institution we work with, and how much is it just free range and you go with Mark Rothko wherever it takes you, know? And
yeah, I mean, and I think it's just, different curators have different modes, and they have different ways of thinking about agency within a project. For me, and especially within this project, it was very much about trying to be a guiding hand as opposed to trying to be a director. But there are moments where those dynamics continually shift. And as a curator, you're not absolute, like we do what we do because we learn from artists and we learn from thinkers. And, I approached a proposition exactly with a feeling of, no, like this isn't within the field of my aesthetics, and this is in the field within my kind of thinking about the politics of aesthetics. And I was completely wrong, and that was not right. It wasn't right. It was a conversation, and you learn from one another. And it sometimes when you're in a situation of working with an artist who you deeply admire, but also who is really responsible for the position you have in the art world. If it wasn't for the work of John, I think many curators of color, many practitioners who are interested in representation and identity wouldn't be where they are in Britain and all around the world. So, it's also recognizing that within every kind of context, there's scope to grow together. So yes, it's also admitting your failures, which I'm quite happy to do as well. Thank you.
In relation to this, Kostas, you worked very, very closely with Adam Faramari in the conceptualizing the work, and so I would be interested, following this question, on how it is the process as a curator to accompany, to be in dialogue, to just be there enough to support the emergence of a work, but also knowing when to stop.
It's a very privileged position to be in, and that film that was commissioned for the 4th iteration of the festival is the result of one of one of a few instinctual moments that I've had in my career where I was in a group exhibition, and I remember passing by a work and just immediately being captivated by listening to the narrative. And that was Adham's work, and they had just started really placing emphasis on narrative, and that was I wanted to encourage that, because that would have been something that would have been a new turn in their work, and that is how we started talking about, and they received the invitation to create the Aristotle Verison Suite. It's an incredibly powerful work, an incredibly layered work that has since traveled, and it was also, as I said, created at a moment where everyone as art professionals and practitioners were challenged because we're in social isolation. So it really took a lot of confidence and trust in the way that we can find new ways to collaborate, but also knowing when to step back, because film work takes time. And one of the main things that I always want to honor when working with artists is their request for time, even if that goes against institutional time or audiences. So that's what I would like to highlight.
This position of being sort of a middle person is really important, mediating between being on the side of the artist while also knowing the patience of an institution. And with this, I would have a question both for Hoor and Guilherme, which is the very kind and generous and respectful way in which you acknowledged the institutions that co-commissioned works with you. And it's both extremely important to acknowledge this, but also to build networks that allow for us to support the making of a work that could only emerge through these through these networks, no, and through alliances between different bodies that together allow for work to be bigger, to emerge. And I would like to ask, maybe it's a bit vague, but I would like to ask if you could tell us more about how these networks are built. How do you have your allies, your partners, and how do you decide to work together across different institutions?
Example before that, because there's an artist I really wanted to talk about, but I didn't find the best image for my presentation. An artist that I commissioned for the last biennial, Alina Mota. So I was talking to her about showing existing work. I had never met Alina before. We were on social media, and I knew her work. She knew what I was doing. And she said to me that, oh, I did this new project, but I couldn't get funding for a film. But I got funding for a book, so I made a book. I've never made a book before, and she won a prize for the book later. So I said to her, well, I still had a few of my commissioned projects free or available for the biennial. And I said to her, you know what, let's make this film. It's called Water is a Time Machine. And she said something, she said, we never get these opportunities in Brazil. It's really important for me. It was, of course, during the pandemic. It was very special. The film ended up also being shown at the Sao Paulo Biennale after that. And I remember telling her that I have so many films in the biennial, as I always do. I have way too many films in my exhibitions. And she said, well, since you have so many films, maybe I should make it short so people don't get tired. I said, who cares if people get tired? Your film is going to be everywhere. You do the film that you want to do. If people have time, they'll watch it. If they don't, it's fine. But there are people who are there every weekend. They'll come and they'll watch it. So she did the half-hour film. She showed it in Sao Paulo. And then she said to me, okay, I want to make a feature film now. So I wanted to just talk about how, these things happen through conversations, through like collaborations with artists, but also through institutions. We all, hopefully all share the same values. We work with the same artists, as we've seen. We have many friends in the art world. It's important that we don't also push artists too far by trying to produce too many works. Sometimes the same artists are in many exhibitions, and it's tiring. Why not come together and produce a stronger piece and have more funding for one project rather than lots of little bits? Yeah.
Well, for me, it's a matter of affinity, both personal and institutional, and a matter of trust as well. We were very lucky at Batalha, for example, because Batalha is making 2 years now. It's a child, but before we even opened, we already had like co-productions, ongoing co-productions with Wheels, for example. We had a beautiful big co-production with Billy Boathill and James Richards, for example, and also in a couple of films. And this was a matter of personal and trust. And then you build up a reputation institutionally, which then adds to the equation, basically. But I think these two ideas, trust and affinity, make really part of the game. Really, it's essential. Yeah.
Here we are. Thank you. Before passing the microphone, and I imagine there's some questions, I wanted to ask any of you if you have an account of a commissioning that surprised you and went into a completely different direction than you thought, and how you respond to this. Because of course you take into account where it's going to take place, the audience that you imagine, or the different audiences that you imagine will attend to it. Also media reception and how that counts to a whole project that you are developing. And then in some cases, as you mentioned, when Jonatas Andrade tells you, I want to work with a community of pensioners who raise pigeons, it may be a surprise, no? So I wanted to ask if any of you wants to give an account of these surprise, unexpected, and how to deal with them.
I will just say that Monty Diawara received the invitation to create this new film for Back to Earth, as I said, and in the beginning the intention was for a lot of the work to be featured in the exhibition of Back to Earth, but listening really to the artists that were involved and invited, and the ways that they were changing their minds through time, included also Monty as saying, I really don't feel comfortable making a work for a museum space or a gallery floor. I really am immersed in this film, and it goes towards a feature-length film, and that will mean that we will need more funding. It will need to change the course of the commission, and as we proudly say at Serpentine, we're artist-led, so we just follow suit.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mine is not a film work. When I was curating the Lahore Biennale, I invited an Emirati artist, Reem Falaknaz, to do a project. My late brother, my twin brother, passed away in 2019, and he sent me, when I was curating the Lahore Biennale, he sent me a video of a man, a Pakistani man on a bike with his pet pigeon flying next to him. So I knew I wanted to do something about the pigeon, the people who look after the pigeons, but also they do pigeon races. So I sent the video to Reem Falaknaz. She went to Lahore. She took amazing photos, footage, videos. I expected a film. She came back with a book, an illustrated book. So in the end, it's not the project that I was hoping for, but the book is a memory of all the sketches. But the work behind it was also special. I hope she publishes that as well. So that's an example, yeah.
One of the kind of other more consuming kind of film commission projects I worked on was Matthew Barney's film Readout, which we staged at the Hayward also during COVID, and it happened to be alongside another project which was really meaningful for me, of a South African artist, Ikshan Adams, who works in textile, and I ended up working on two massive shows at once, jumping between them and essentially having to move on to Ikshan's and just see the final kind of installation of Matthew's film happen alongside mine. So we got years into the process of talking about that work, and then there was a period of darkness where I eventually saw that work then existing, alongside an artist who is dealing with, through textile and fiber and sculpture, feelings of kind of ideas of masculinity and longing and desire, alongside this monumentally masculine work of Matthew Barney's, which you can well imagine. And I think, the element of surprise, I think, is always also there when you think about film in galleries sometimes as well, because film and architecture, film and the spatial context, but also film in terms of how how it kind of unfolds physically in a space can always have a very different iteration to what you might imagine as you're going through a commissioning process and you're dealing with things conversationally or through images or digitally or online, and then suddenly seeing things unravel or manifest in a physical space can sometimes completely shift your relationship to it. So yeah, I think that was a big one for me.
From my point of view, I think I always make sure that somehow expectations fail. I like that. And it's not a bad thing necessarily. So adding another layer to the conversation, I think it's part of the game is also be ready to take the risk of failure, which is it's always there. And there is one thing which for me is very important and very difficult at the same time, not just facing the risk which exists, but also trying to avoid to make the artists be who we want them to be, which is can easily happen because we have a film in mind. If we are visual and we are curators as well, so we have an idea, and sometimes it's very tempting to jump in, and we really have to avoid, I think, that to make the person be something we have in mind, person as an artist, and the risk is there. We have to. We can just we have to be ready to end up with a bad work. It happened to me. It's what it is. So the way of avoiding that is to work with really good artists. For me. So to mitigate the risk, you have to really to work with really good people. In order to do the other things around it, make sense.
Thank you. We have time for 2 questions. No pressure. The good thing is that Loop is a place for us to go around, and we are going to be here. So parallel, personal, shy questions can also happen after this.
We'll be in our rooms if you have questions.
But Marta has a microphone, and so, yes.
Well, thank you everyone for everything you presented. I'm going to do it quick, and I'm going to refer to what Hoor said about business, that it's not as usual for the past year. And I wonder when, for example, you were working, Tarini, on the Pavilion of UK, thinking about what was going on and also the UK being complicit in what is going on. What curatorial conversation or curatorial gesture you have thought with John while working on the project?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I also want to thank Hoor for saying what she said at the beginning of her talk, and I think that's so important. Yes, it was not a painful backdrop to what was happening. It was very much at the heart of what we were thinking about. John's work deals with occupation, warfare, brutality, oppression, erasure, silencing. All of these issues are not academic issues, they are lived issues that we're seeing unfold around us. So for us, there were a lot of conversations. We had an amazing community in our little imperial section of the Giardini of other women of color, of other artists of color who were dealing with similar thematics, from Kapwani Kiwanga and Gaetan Werner in Canada to Julien Creuset and Cindy Sissoko in France. And all of us were talking about the connectivity of these issues. And initially we had planned to do a performance piece during the opening. But we knew, as had been the conversation over several months, that there were planned protests. And that's not the first time that Venice has been a stage for kind of major geopolitical issues, as it should be, personally. Think so. And so at that point, we decided this was not something we wanted to compete against. We knew that it was happening on the day of the press preview, when John and I performatively would have to stand on those stairs and do multiple interviews, and that's something that we embraced and felt like was really important to do as we were doing our filmed interviews, and to have that in the background. that intervention that we had on the front of the building, and literally trying to destabilize those architectural languages. Many of those images look at different brutalities, include images from the Middle East, include images from Lebanon. Many of these archives come into play, and we didn't want to shy away at looking at Britain's own complicity within several global phenomenon that relate to what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. So it's something that I wish there was always opportunity to embrace more. I know we spoke about it a lot, Filipa, when we were in Venice together with other curators. But I think that it's an important question to think about agency and visibility in these moments of coming together as an art world, and I would hope the transparency and the openness in which we should be able to talk about these things too.
Thank you so much, Tarini. I think it's also a good place to leave us, to continue thinking about this. Thank you. Thank you.